Welcome to the first webinar of our series. And this is a collaborative effort between Clemson University and the USDA Southeast Climate Hub. And we will be addressing some practical strategies and resources for enhancing the resilience of forage and livestock systems under extreme weather conditions. So in this first webinar, we'll be focusing on livestock health and management, and basically planning ahead and dealing with the aftermath as well under extreme events for livestock. So today, we'll be joined by two great speakers. But before we move forward with the presentations, I just want to mention a few housekeeping rules. So please keep your microphone muted at all times so it does not interfere with our guest speakers' presentations while they're talking. We will have time for questions later after each one of the presentations. So please save your questions for the designated time later. Also, this presentation is being recorded and you will have access to the link later so you can rewatch or you can catch up if you miss anything today. Also, the links for the additional resources that the speakers mentioned will also be available later for you to access them. So without any further ado, let's get started. So our first speaker today is Dr. Eastman. Dr. Eastman graduated with his bachelor's in animal sciences from NC State University and his GVM degree from Mississippi State University. Currently, he's the director of field services at Clemson Livestock Poultry Health. Dr. Eastman, thank you so much for being here today and welcome. And we're looking forward to hear your presentation.
Thank you. Let me share my screen. So thank you for having me, Liliana, and I certainly appreciate everybody attending and listening to what we're going to talk about today. I have, this presentation is labeled Equine Disasters, which I'll spend quite a bit of time on, but I also used to be a swine veterinarian in Eastern North Carolina. So I will mention those as I go through the presentation. The swine world is very much different than the equine world in terms of how they prepare and how prepared they are for disasters. So my job here as Director of Field Services is I oversee all the livestock sale barns, stockyards, things like that, and all the livestock inspectors. So our job is to make sure everything is identified correctly with official ID and that we have disease traceability throughout the state. I have lived all over the country. I've lived in Western Montana, New Mexico, and all those potential disasters in those places, as well as the Southeast United States. So I'll kind of tell some stories a little bit, but hopefully not keep you too long. So South Carolina is a unique state in that, we have a lot of different things going on here in terms of potential disasters. We have hurricanes, and with those hurricanes, we generally have a lot of flooding associated with the coastal area of the state. In the northwest part of our state, we have quite a few earthquakes as well. Little ones, 2 to 3 on the Richter scale, but still have them. And our ice storms are famous here in South Carolina. We typically don't get a lot of snow, but we do typically get a good bit of ice during our winter times. We do have some disease outbreaks here and there of equine infectious anemia or the routine disease outbreaks that we have in our livestock populations. We do have wildfires in our upstate, which is the northwest corner of South Carolina. We had some pretty big fires this past year up in the mountain part of our state, and so that's a whole nother evacuation process we have to go through there. And South Carolina is unique in that we have 8 nuclear power plants in the state of South Carolina. we are a very small state, so that's pretty high concentration of nuclear power plants. And our emergency preparedness department is constantly preparing in case there's a leak or an escape of nuclear material, radiologic material. And we also have, occasional chemical spills or rendering truck spills that we have to possibly evacuate in a certain radius for those chemical spills, but those are probably the least frequent thing we experience here in South Carolina. So one thing we always tell people is, and I put in here that animal emergency response isn't always neat and tidy. I can almost tell you it's never neat and tidy in the initial stages. The initial stages of any kind of, whether it's a disease response or a disaster response, is always chaotic in the initial stages. And then once we get our rhythm and our feet under us, typically it smooths out toward the end of the response. So the top picture is just in the initial stages, it's just chaotic. There might be livestock wandering the streets. I know this past year we had Hurricane Helene hit, and we had absolutely no roads available in the upstate of South Carolina in the northwest corner because so many trees were down and people were essentially stranded in their own houses because they couldn't go up and down the road. So whenever I talk about the equine population in South Carolina, the one gold standard that the census that we did that was done in 2004, they've done a couple since then, but this tends to be the gold standard and the most informative census we've done in South Carolina. At that time in 2004, we had almost 85,000 horses in South Carolina. That number has risen over the years. We have just under 100,000 horses in South Carolina now. Of that, the majority of those horses are quarter horses, light breed horses, Western performance horses, things like that. However, all other breeds are represented, and so it is growing slowly, incrementally, but it does pose some challenges in terms of logistics when a hurricane or a disaster occurs. Here's a map of our state with the horse densities, and as you can see up in the northwest corner, we have much more dense population over a 5-county area, and then in the Midlands, kind of in the middle of the state, you have Aiken, which is the most populated county we have in South Carolina. Fortunately for us, out on the East Coast, we do have a less dense population of horses, but and that's good in terms of when we have a hurricane or storms run through. The demand for evacuation is not nearly what it would be in the northwest corner of the state. So when we're talking about preparing for a disaster, for the hurricanes, we know they're coming. They're predicted and we can see them coming on our radars. How do we get ready? When do we get ready? Things like that. Number one, our horse people are very mobile. Horse people are arguably more mobile than our livestock population is, considering, most households don't have very many horses. Most of our cattle people, it would be logistically difficult to get those loaded up and evacuated. So a lot easier for horse people and horse owners to grab the trailer, get it ready, maybe even practice getting ready, and things like that. So number one's records. I'm a state animal health official. That is my business, is making sure our paperwork is right, our Coggins, our health certificates, or we do have a 6-month health certificate here in the United States that we can use. Identifying those horses or livestock, especially during a hurricane when we might have some fences down, tornadoes might get our fences, but there's no warning with those, so it's kind of hard to prepare for those. We use a lot of livestock paint. We will braid tags into their mane and tail. All my horses are branded, so we will have I'll have freeze brands on those horses. We recommend those freeze brands to help identify those horses, and of course microchips and photos. This is just an example. It's a friend of mine in Florida who's experienced multiple hurricanes come through Florida. He uses a grease marker, puts his phone number on there, and you can notice in the mane and tail of that horse, she has identification tags so that if that horse is found at large, then they know who to call and who it belongs to. So Identifying those horses, there's different ways we can do it. We need them to be easily identifiable with a microchip. The microchip has its cons, has its downfalls in that during a disaster response, we don't necessarily have a microchip reader available. So a lot of times we want those outwardly visible markings like grease markers, with phone numbers, identification tags, things like that. Always have your cognizance so you can almost prove that you own that horse and have ownership of that horse when you find it at large wandering around somewhere. So when I was in practice, we have we my practice offered first aid kits to my horse owners. These are two companies that do really good. I'm not endorsing either one, but they do have that customizable feature. You can customize your own first aid kit, and so they're always have those on hand. We have, I have my set of recommendations just like anybody with different things that you can put in one. The big thing is anything to wrap up leg wounds or treat open wounds in horses. This is the horse from back in the 90s. A hurricane came through Florida, and this veterinarian is addressing that wound. Duct tape is a great thing. Duct tape fixes everything just about it. So I always put duct tape on there because you never know when you might not have what you need, and you can pop a bandage on there and wrap it up in duct tape. Also want a thermometer, stethoscopes, some kind of hand towels. Antibacterial soap is good. I used to tell people Dial soap is great for that, just regular Dial soap. The human physicians will use that for their patients pre-surgery. And so prior to the surgical scrub, they'll ask the patient to use Dial soap to clean before they go to surgery. Works really well. Now, most of these, the veterinary medicine in the United States has changed quite a bit in the last 5 or so years, in that most of these products are prescription only now. So, but Banamine and phenylbutazone are both non-steroidal anti-inflammatories. Antibiotics, SMZ tablets or sulfamethasone tablets are a staple in every horse barn. And of course, if they have an eye injury or open wounds, you'll have to have things in there to address those issues as well. So when it comes to evacuating for a storm or a hurricane or a possible flood, the question is, do I evacuate or do I not? Do I go or do I stay? A lot of the considerations to take into account is your fencing. Do you have trees on the fence line? Do you have a barn that's, can withstand the storm? Is your property in a floodplain? If it is, then if there's a chance for a flood, you might need to, evacuate, get to higher ground. And then, of course, the logistics of it is actual leaving is what is your trailer space and availability? How many horses can you load up? How many animals can you load up, whether it be livestock or horses? When it's evacuation time, do you go? When do you go? How do you go? Where do you go? And is your animals, are your livestock able to travel? So those are all just basic questions I ask myself before I end up having to evacuate. Number one thing is I always try to inform my family, my friends, where I'm going to be or where I'm headed to in case I get caught in the storm last minute or caught in some sort of disaster last minute. They know where I'm at. They know the route I'm taking. I'll say it multiple times in this presentation is make sure your horses are vaccinated. All your cognizant tests are good, current. And then I try to tell people to evacuate at least 72 hours before the storm hits. Now, living in Western Montana, and we're talking about hurricanes in South Carolina, in Western Montana, we had a fire season just like we have a hurricane season here. Fire seasons can be a lot like hurricanes in that there's going to be a fire somewhere. You just don't know where and which direction it's going. So if there's a fast moving fire, sometimes you don't have 72 hours to leave, but most of the time they're pretty slow moving fires out in Montana, and you can kind of make a plan. All my clients in Montana had trailers ready, at the ready, had livestock trailers, horse trailers, anything they needed to get out of the way of that fire. and get to safety. So I tend to tell people I use my GPS, and that's a common thing now is using GPS. And that will tell you how traffic is. South Carolina has evacuation routes marked on our roads from the coast up to the northwest part of the state. And a lot of times those, um, they'll tell you how the traffic is on those roads if your GPS is equipped like it needs to be. And I always say take 2 to 3 days of feed and hay or as much as you can pack into your trailer. And then once you get to your destination, wherever you're going, find you a place that if you're there for an extended period of time, then you can purchase that stuff as you run out. So if you take your horse with you and you're evacuating everything with your horse, and you go to an unknown barn or a new barn where there's lots of evacuees, I say biosecurity is everything. Keeping those horses away from unknown horses. Don't share your buckets, your brushes, your water hoses, any of your equipment. Don't share that stuff. I'm a little bit of an isolationist, and they call me antisocial sometimes because in those situations, I'll find the stall that's furthest away from everybody else and put my horses in it, because even though they're vaccinated for everything, I don't want them exposed to something that we might not vaccinate for. On the inverse of that, if you left your horses at home, when you get home, do that cursory check over. Find the horses. If they're still in the pasture, do a general well-being exam on them. Make sure they're hydrated and getting water. Check for any trauma, any lacerations, anything like that. And then check your property. Are there any exposed power lines? Are your water sources still good? Are they still working? Are your fences still intact? And has your barn survived the storm or the disaster? Sometimes you'll find new animals on your site. Fences will be down, and other animals, whether it be cattle or horses, have wandered onto your place and set up shop. So make sure you don't have any new visitors. Here's a horse in South Texas from several years ago. They had some floods down there, and this was just one of about 10 horses out of that herd that had spent 4 days in chest deep water. And they call this waterline disease, and it's just a result of being standing in water for 4 days. And that skin just gets weak, it gets soft, and eventually it will slough off. And the Texas veterinarians have become very good at treating this disease. And this horse actually returned to work, healed up. It was a long recovery, but the horse healed up and was able to have a good quality of life and actually went back to work. So, but these are pretty drastic when you pull these horses out of the water and they look like this. It's pretty shocking to somebody that's not familiar with it. One thing about storms or floods or traumatic, disasters, tornadoes, anything like that, when you're checking on your animals, we see a lot of traumatic wounds, a lot of lacerations from flying tin off of barns to trees to any kind of debris that may be flying. And then if it's sustained winds and your barn collapses, then you see those crushing injuries, back injuries a lot. And then horses are famous for stressing themselves into a colic, right? So sometimes they'll get dehydrated, but most of the time those horses are stressing over what's going on and the chaos that has incurred, and they'll stress themselves into a colic. So the horse on the left that you've seen from the 90s, from a hurricane, we see a lot of this after a hurricane, especially in Florida. And our job as veterinarians is to triage those cases. This veterinarian had 4 cases waiting in line to be seen, from large animal to small animal. So he had to figure out which one's the first one to treat and which one's the worst. So he was in the process of doing all that. The horse on the right, was one of my patients. I lived in Southeast Virginia, and tropical storm was rolling through, and the lady that owned this herd of horses was calling them in, trying to get them into the barn in the early parts of that storm. And this horse called a fence post, a T-post coming into the barn, and right there in the top left corner just peeled her skin all the way back to her flank. And I spent 4 hours in the middle of a tropical storm stitching this horse up because that was a truly emergency that we had to address, and she came together really well, and that horse healed up, and the scar gave her a story to tell later on. But it's not necessarily storm related that we see. It's the panic that people have trying to get things in to protect their livestock, and they end up getting injured in the process. So we also worry about head and neck trauma in those animals. Sometimes aspiration pneumonia. Ichthyosis is one that we see in really wet areas in the deep south, like Mississippi or Alabama. We see a lot of ichthyosis down there. When a hurricane comes up through New Orleans, it brings all that good stuff that causes that. See some abscesses. Tetanus is a big one because flying metal and horses possibly not being vaccinated. Here in South Carolina, we always see an increase in cases of Eastern equine encephalitis and West Nile virus post-hurricane because there's so much water, there's so much flooding, and it attracts mosquitoes which carry that disease. So we will always see a bump in cases of those two diseases after a hurricane comes through. Biggest thing I tell producers and horse owners is call your veterinarian when you find something. If you have a first aid kit, kind of, give that veterinarian the conditions, give him the vitals of that animal, heart rate, mucous membranes, respiratory rate, and they can kind of give you some recommendations until they can get there to do while you wait on the veterinarian to arrive at your place. Shameless plug for all the vaccines again is we always recommend these vaccines. Now to switch gears just a little bit, I don't have any slides, but the swine industry in North Carolina and South Carolina is very intensive management. It is total confinement, and these companies have learned to be really good at disaster preparedness, whether they're floods, whether it's hurricanes, fires, anything like that. They are really good at preparing for it and addressing it when it needs to be addressed. And hurricanes, hurricanes are the most popular thing because that's what they're most prepared for. And typically a week before the hurricane arrives, depending on the size of the hurricane, the EPA will actually call the companies, tell them to spray the effluent out of their lagoons, and the slang term is pump your lagoons. And they would pump their lagoons until they were empty. And then the rains from the hurricane would not, the effluent coming out of that lagoon would not hurt the environment due to just the amount of rain that we received from hurricanes. So when I was in the swine industry, we never had a lagoon overflow. We never had a lagoon bust. EPA works really well. These companies are very prepared for disasters. There are disasters we can't prepare for, like nuclear, nuclear leak from a nuclear power plant or a radiological leak. Things like that. Tornadoes are a whole nother ball of wax. We've had our poultry farms in South Carolina get hit by tornadoes. So we respond to those, especially when we still have poultry in those barns and they were hit by a hurricane, and we have to address that and respond to those. A lot of that is if we have to humanely euthanize those animals, we end up, disposing of those carcasses, whether it be burial, which we are allowed to do in South Carolina, or composting those. So the commercial agricultural business, tends to be very well prepared for those things, and they already have their plans in place in case there's a mass mortality. But I think that concludes me. That's all of my talk, Liliana. I'll hang around till the end in case there's anybody that has any questions.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Dr. Eastman. We can take some questions now. If anybody would ask before our second speaker. Well, let's wait for people to come up with those questions, so we will take them later as well. Thank you so much, Dr. Eastman. Let's thank our speaker, everyone, here. So our second speaker today is Dr. Patty Scharko. Dr. Scharko graduated with her bachelor's in general agriculture from UGA. Then she got MPH in public health from Chapel Hill, and her GVM from UGA as well. Currently, Dr. Scharko is a professor and extension field veterinarian at Clemson Livestock Poultry Health. Thank you so much, Dr. Scharko, for being here with us today. I really appreciate the information that you're going to share, and welcome.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And thank you for those attending. And hopefully you have some information. I greatly appreciate Dr. Sean Eastman's slides because I took them and turned them into to my area of expertise. But I'm here with Dr. Eastman in Columbia. We're with the state veterinarian's office, and yes, as an extension veterinarian, we cover the state. You've already seen there's lots to worry about for all of our different livestock animals. This is a 2017 census, and it's just saying at the top is our poultry. And I apologize, but our poultry veterinarian, Dr. Julie Helm, is not available today. So Dr. Eastman and I are covering our species, and maybe another time if you need something on poultry. But certainly emergency response is part of our work, and especially Dr. Catherine McDonald works on a daily basis. But, you know, our cattle are primarily in the upstate on there, so they're a little bit further away from the hurricanes. But if we look at our small ruminants, they pretty much are everywhere, and it looks like Horry County has some heavy numbers too. So we've got all these different events that could happen, and we've got our animals across. And I guess maybe, Dr. Eastman, I'll put a plug in for getting a premise identification number from our office, because that allows us to know what species you have, where you're located, and if a flood is occurring, we can notify you through knowing this information on that. So Dr. Eastman had how do we prepare, and definitely having a trailer, but you know, our livestock are a little bit harder to move, and I cover primarily cattle, goats, and sheep. So it's good to have identification and photos of these animals ahead of time, especially with the ID in there. So with cattle, we can put a farm tag in them. We can put an 840 RFID, radio frequency identification. That's that white one that is right here. But as Charlie Kelly says, it should be further in and up to be placed on there. Freeze brand could be done ahead of time, but we like the official ID. And then certainly if you've got one cow, you could grease mark it like you do for a horse if they would allow you to ride on it. For small ruminants, we've got scrapie tags. This is a premier one, but right now we're using Shearwell through USDA. Microchips can be used in small ruminants, but it's very important that they're placed either at the base of the ear or in the tail web, because we consider, even if they're pets, they could potentially be food animals. So we need the microchip away, and you would definitely need a reader to go with it. And it's not visible. So it would be, you know, a visible tag would be important to have on the animal. So you could actually go with a dog collar with your contact information. This is Georgia. I don't know how many of y'all know La Mancha goats have very small ears, so hard to put a tag in their ear. So this is what was recommended, is to put a scrapie tag in a dog collar, but certainly putting something around their neck and putting your information on there would be good. I did put duct tape at the top of my list because it can be used for so many different things on there, and having some sort of disinfectant for your first aid kit to clean wounds and disinfect equipment. Gloves. I feel like a lot of the small ruminant diseases potentially are public health concerns. So having gloves when you work on the animals is important. Having paper towels, disposable or hand towels or both, would be great to have on hand. And then some sort of a hand soap, just to wash your hands after working with the animals. And a thermometer just after the event, if they start to go off feed, it's good to check their temperature to see if they have a fever or not. So medications to keep on hand for our livestock, I believe you should get the injectable vitamin B complex. The multiple B is over the counter that you can get at your local place, Tractor Supply, Southern States Agriculture Supply. Now, antibiotics, it would be good to have on hand, but these are prescriptions. And so you're going to need a VCPR, a valid veterinary client-patient relationship, with a local veterinarian to be able to order these antibiotics. And I've got, for example, Biomycin 200 or LA 200, and this is just a plug for beef quality assurances. The Biomycin does cost a little bit more, but it's a little less irritating. And especially in our small ruminants, they don't get as upset with these injections with Biomycin. But it's a tetracycline, good for foot rot, good for pink eye, good for a lot of things. Most of our respiratory bacteria are resistant to tetracycline, so you have to go usually with the higher potent antibiotic for pneumonias, respiratory problems. And certainly having syringes and needles that are appropriate for the size of animals that you've got. To evacuate or not to evacuate. I think a lot of the time we're not going to be evacuating our livestock, keep them in place. Oftentimes gates can be open to be able to allow the animals to move away from the flood areas, or you move the animals to higher ground if possible. And definitely if you are thinking about going, make sure that your animal's able to travel. So this is looking at a cattle that had her had foot worked on and is definitely three-legged lame and would not be able to travel. So we just need to look at our animals and how they can travel. I agree with Dr. Eastman, just as far as making sure the tips for movement, if you do, and to carry enough feed and hay for your animals that you have on there. This is a slide from Beef Quality Assurance. And so I hope your trailer does not look like this with the flat tire and a lot of rust. So definitely before anything happens, you should be checking to make sure that all the, everything works for brakes and axles, the tires especially, safety chains. Make sure that the floor is stable and can support the load. We don't want feet breaking through on there. And, just plan ahead. So this is from Beef Quality Assurance. And also this is from Beef Quality Assurance's calf hauling. They also have a chart for cattle hauling, but this is calf hauling. And just important that you don't exceed the capacity of the truck or trailer or legal load limits. Oftentimes during these events, load limits sometimes are lifted to be able to carry a little bit more weight on different back roads. But for cattle, at least, the guidelines are 1.3 square feet per 100 pounds of adult cattle. And if you look at this calf weight, it varies anywhere from 1.75 to 1.3 square feet. But this gives you an idea of the trailer and how many head could possibly be fitted into that. Definitely biosecurity. It's like going to the state fair, but if you're going somewhere with other animals, beware of nose-to-nose contact with animals from the other farms. Definitely current on vaccines and keep the equipment clean and try to not share. So definitely making sure that the property is okay, that the animals have water, and that the power lines are not down, that someone could get hurt. Check the animals over. And I didn't want to share any pictures. I appreciate Dr. Eastman sharing the horse pictures, but have seen some pretty brutal ones lately. And I felt like I've got some other pictures and just a little bit, but not the wounds and lacerations that happen. And call your veterinarian. Veterinarians may be very busy with all that they've got going on, but call them if you need first aid help on there and follow the directions from them. For vaccinations for small ruminants, really want tetanus and Clostridium C and D, Clostridium perfringens. So usually that's our CDT vaccine. It can be a 7-way vaccine that we use from cattle, but this protects them, Clostridium perfringens, from overeating. So I worry if they get into too much grain, whatever else might happen. And then rabies, if these are around people, you need to consider movement of possible rabid animals and more exposure. So it is approved for annual in sheep and cattle and horses. It's not approved in goats. We do use it, and it does protect, but you need to purchase this rabies through the local veterinarian. Either they need to inject or they will sell you the vaccine to inject. But I think most of South Carolina veterinarians want to vaccinate with the rabies vaccine. Though for cattle, definitely blackleg for our younger cattle, less than a year of age. 7-way with floods, soil moves, and Clostridium shovii, which causes blackleg, can be moved and brought into a field or a pasture where cattle have never been exposed to it. And having been in Kentucky for a number of years and seen a lot of blackleg deaths, it happens so fast. Prevention is much easier than trying to treat, because usually they're found dead. So that's usually an annual vaccination after you've boosted them. Certainly you can do adults. And then there are a lot of other IBR, BVD, PI3 vaccines out there. And just please get your local veterinarian to help advise what would be best to be kept current on. So I went to Lee Van Blake. He is our team leader for Clemson Livestock and Forage team, extension team. And he is in the PD area, which is sort of in Florence, near toward Myrtle Beach area. He's experienced 2015, 2016, 2018 floods. And he said number one was moldy hay, the hay that was wet, that stayed in water, and couldn't dry out, got moldy. So I'm going to have just talking about testing for that. The flooding of the pastures and hayfields, they saw a whole lot of weed issues occur. So need to have that in mind. Toxic plants, exposure with fences down, but especially wild cherry trees, when the branches are injured, they make the cyanide, prussic acid, that can kill cattle and goats and sheep very quickly. And then, like Sean said, is fencing of the cattle getting out, that they had that problem. I think anytime you have trees go down, cattle are eager to try to get out, and goats are always looking to try to get out. So Lee had recommended that the Dairy One Forage Lab in Cornell is the place to go to. So I reached out to them, and they said for moldy hay, they recommended the mold and yeast counts for $38, but there's certainly mycotoxin testing, and wet corn. Definitely worry about some of these mycotoxins that could potentially happen, but it's not cheap to test on there. So if in doubt, be cautious about feeding wet feed on there. And definitely down fences mean they can get out, and then they usually try to. Also, getting out, they can get injured and go down, and downer animals need to be well cared for, and a decision needs to be made whether they should be humanely euthanized or not. This is a beef quality assurance slide showing a down animal that's being either pulled or lifted. This is the way to go. This is the humane method of working with the down animal before you decide whether the animal needs to be put down or euthanized. So I'm going to touch on euthanasia just because I feel like we don't want animals to suffer, and these injured animals on there. So we want to use an acceptable euthanasia method, and I'm going to just mention or talk about gunshot. And because there are a lot of people that have firearms available. Number one is personal safety is number one. So you want to make sure nobody is going to get with a ricochet if it's used. Definitely want good handling and restraint of the animal. And we want the person who would be using the gun would be trained and skilled on this. And we need to worry about public perception. Putting trucks or whatever against the public roads so that people driving by aren't able to see our downers, hay bales or whatever. We just need to be careful of the public perception, because we're trying to take care of our down animals, but see if they are going to get better or if they need to be euthanized. So I'm using some slides from Beef Quality Assurance. That this was a 2013 study that the star in the circle is actually the displaced material, and just showing that the firearm with a hollow point is not very effective, but with a solid point round is. And then on the far right, the least effective is what our highway patrolmen carry. And so I always have said, make sure we are not shooting between the eyes, but also if you've got a very adult bull or cow, this firearm is not good for that on there. This is some more, but the best one that they found was the shotgun with the 12 gauge on there. And Dr. Eastman is much better on firearms than I am. So if any questions, I'm going to direct it to him. But what I'd like to do is with the firearm is, where do you aim? And this is looking at several shots of pictures, and I'm a visual person, and this is just looking at, you do not aim between the eyes for almost all of our animals. And really you need to be within 3 feet. So you really need to be safe, and the animal needs to be restrained well enough. And this is just showing different methods of looking at making lines on the pole and the top of the outside eye, the lateral canthus. Anyway, different lines, but just trying to show you where that brain is. And once again, need to go perpendicular to it. So when we do euthanize, we want to make sure they are properly done. I use the captive bolt, and captive bolt is 95% effective. So I have to make sure that I'm using other methods to make absolutely sure that the animal is down on there. This is where the stethoscope could come in to check to make sure that the heart rate goes down. Have used the corneal reflex where we touch the lens of the eye, and they don't reflex, but it's not the best, but it's a start. If they blink, they've not been put down on there, but there are different ways of checking for confirming that they are dead. That was for cattle. Iowa State has done a lot of research and information. I'm just showing a chart that actually when I went to Iowa State, it was in the Center for Food Safety and Public Health website as far as for this, but actually the bottom line is the AVMA has the 2020 euthanasia, and they have a lot more photos of horses and other animals using gunshot. And once again, guns are usually available. Euthanasia solution is not, and that would be under, a veterinarian would carry it. We have to worry about the euthanasia pentabarb staying in the environment. So gunshot is important to know how to properly do it and to realize that it is a very effective, humane method of euthanasia for our animals. What to do with the carcass is definitely local, state, and federal regulations. DHEC, now it's Environmental Sciences in South Carolina, regulates large sites on our larger farms as far as where they can be placed, but definitely burial needs to be at least 3 feet deep covered. Definitely away from running water, definitely, water sources. In some areas we can't bury because of how low or high the water table is. So composting is one method of doing this above ground, and Dr. Eastman had a workshop on that for people across the U.S. Last year. And incineration is certainly very expensive, and landfill depends. Most of our landfills are private, and so it's up to the group to whether they take it or not. So that is our livestock health and management, planning ahead and dealing with the aftermath under extreme weather events. Dr. Lillian, and I'm looking at the time. Do I have time just to share a few slides?
Sure.
As far on there, and then I can come back to here, but just always have to say we are very concerned about the New World screwworm. This is a fly that lays larvae into tissue, and these live tissue, and it is in Mexico and very afraid of coming into the United States. It was in South Carolina and eradicated in 1959. There are some people that still remember, just a few people remember having to treat cattle for this, but we are very concerned about storms, with flies, movement, and everything else on there. So I just say, be aware of the New World screwworm that's close to the United States. And if you have any suspected cases of maggots that look like they're more than what you normally would see, aggressive on there, please contact your local veterinarian, your state animal health official, or a federal USDA veterinarian on there, is my plug on that. So Dr. Silva, that's the information. I guess we had some time that our poultry veterinarian could have spoken, but I appreciate, let me stop sharing.
Thank you so much, Dr. Scharko. Great presentation. So now I would like to open for questions, if anybody has.
Whatever.
While I wait for people to, and then you can unmute yourself if you have any questions. While we wait for more questions, I wanted to ask something that it's gonna be more broad for both of you, share your thoughts. So we have a lot of extension agents, USDA agents, consultants, a lot of people here that will be in the role of helping farmers on the aftermath of those extreme events that we usually have, hurricanes, etc. So for them now, what would be maybe 1 or 2 points or even more that you would advise them on how to best help the farmers after something happened? What would be like the first thoughts or first things that they should be aware of that they could be providing or as information or doing themselves on that aftermath?
I know that Dr. Nault and Dr. Catherine McDonald appreciate giving feedback to the extension agents to give to the state so that we know where the areas need help. Mm-hmm. So finding out, no cell phone, no electricity. What else, Dr. Eastman?
Well, I mean, anytime our responses tend to start on the local level. So, knowing where, like when Hurricane Helene came in, we were having issues getting water to some cattle, and my inspectors jumped to it, found they personally knew the fire department, so they were able to get water delivered to the cattle. Think about your local resources for those guys that are helping out. Who do they know that can provide those services? Water, feed, things like that are going to be kind of prime importance. Making sure those animals can eat and drink, and then we've had to Lee Van Blake a couple of years ago had to airlift hay to some cattle that were stranded in a floodplain. So just using local resources and if you know somebody that has a feed store or something like that, use those local resources to help. We always have a chain of command when our emergency response. So we're always contacting, our local people, but they're also reporting up so that the emergency management division knows that we are providing that help.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. So we have one question on the chat. Are there 3-year rabies or longer available for small animals or equine?
So we have 3-year rabies for our small animals. Nothing that lasts any longer than 3 years. And then in the horse world, we actually give them the 3-year rabies vaccines, but they only last a year in a horse. So in a horse, it is an annual vaccination, but in small animals, a lot of vaccines that they've developed in the last few years are 3-year vaccines.
Okay. Anybody would like to unmute to ask any questions?
Or to add information that they might have experienced, for sure. Always learning.
No? Okay. So I have another question, and I know you covered some of these already, but we are in the hurricane season in the Southeast. So just both for farmers that are here, but also for agents. For the farmers that still don't have, are not prepared for extreme events, what would be maybe just a couple of essential things that they should leave this talk today and go get themselves that should be on the top of their priority right now on the livestock categories that species that you covered?
Can I just say that you need to, once again, have, to me, for livestock, a VCPR, a veterinary client-patient relationship. Have a veterinarian. I know we're limited on large animal veterinarians here in South Carolina. We're hoping to change that with the new College of Veterinary Medicine for Clemson, but get that relationship ahead of time is what I would put. What about you, Dr. Eastman?
I think that's important. You have to have that relationship in order to get a lot of medications these days. For me, in my head, I'm making a plan, whether I write it down, whether I start with a plan, make a list of, okay, I got to have the vet, I got to have, a trailer, I've got to do this, but make a list, kind of, whether it's in your mind or on paper, have that plan. I know, learned in Montana with the forest fires, you got to have that plan because those fires can move very fast sometimes. And we had some people that had to get out of their ranch, get off their ranch pretty fast because of fast moving fire was coming through. So they had a plan, and they've learned a long time ago to make a plan, have that plan.
I see that Luke Quick mentioned about attending a cattle handling training at the local law enforcement training center, and that is very good about doing letting I'm not sure if they got it or the local law enforcement, but having them feel comfortable being around large animals and how to work around them safely, especially if there's a overturned truck on tractor trailer on the highway, is very important. And Dr. Eastman, that reminded me that I forgot to say with a firearm is that as an owner, you can put your animals down, but be careful about putting other people's animals down without their permission. You need their permission.
Yes, you do.
On there. And so a tractor trailer that goes over where the truck driver is there, they need to call the owner before the animals can be put down. And it's very important. A lot of people want to get the animals out. Sorry, that's another emergency, but people want to get the animals out of the trailer. And it's important to keep them in the trailer off the highway as much as possible until you've got fencing to be able to let the animals out and to figure out who's hurt.
Great. So we do have another question on the chat. How do you connect with safe places out of the evacuation area if you need to evacuate with small livestock?
So on the horses, we have a list. I'm on the South Carolina Horse Council. We try to generate a list every year of stabling, emergency stabling facilities that will take evacuees from storms or disasters, whether it be any kind of disaster, they're open their barns to evacuees. The small livestock, Dr. Scharko, do you have any input on that?
I know Dr. McDonald works with counties to have for pets, sheltering for pets, but for our small ruminants, no. I'm certainly they could be possibly put into a horse stall for small ruminants. We're at a loss, and I'm not sure how many people would be willing to move their small ruminants.
Mm-hmm. And Dr. Eastman, that list that you mentioned for horses, where is it available?
I think we try to keep a list of it on our website, on the Clemson Livestock Poultry Health website. Also, we have it on South Carolina Horse Council's website. Usually ahead of hurricane season, the Horse Council will put out a Facebook post, a social media post. Anybody that's willing to sign up to be an emergency stabling facility can, and then we'll publish all that.
Sure, thank you. So, does anybody have any additional questions at this moment?
I have
Sure, go ahead.
I noticed during Hurricane Helene in our area, in Pickens County area, the local Facebook groups were a really good resource. There were a lot of people who had enclosed empty pastures that were offering to let people whose fences had been destroyed move their animals, their goats, pigs, horses, whatever. I did notice that the local Facebook groups were a good resource for people looking to try to move their goats and things like that, and try to find stuff like that after Helene.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I always see, I lived in Florida for some years, and I remember seeing a lot of good information on Facebook always, and same here as well. So that's definitely a good way to communicate. Would Dr. Eastman or Dr. Scharko like to add anything else?
I think
No?
I'm good.
Okay, perfect. So thank you so much, everyone, for attending. Thank you so much, our speakers today, Dr. Scharko and Dr. Eastman. We really appreciate the information that you shared. We look forward to see everybody on the second webinar about forages and forage systems on Thursday at the same time. And you should be able to connect using the same link that you used today. So thank you again, everyone, our speakers, and let's thank our speakers before we leave.
Thank you, Dr. Sylvia, for coordinating this.
So thank you. Have a wonderful day, everyone. Thank you.